Hey everybody, Andy Kvernen here with another Cornerstone Connection daily devotional. A while back, we were in a congregational meeting making a pretty big decision, and we were having some discussion, and at one point in the conversation, one of our members who'd been around our church for quite a long time made this statement. I'm not quoting exactly, I'm paraphrasing, but he said something like this. He said, in the past, God showed up, and God did this, and God used our church in this specific way to do this specific thing. I don't see any reason why here in the present, God wouldn't do the same thing. I'm not at all intimidated by the decision that's before us. The God who's been faithful in the past will be faithful once again. And I so much appreciated that comment in that moment, because it gave us all a sense of confidence that, yeah, God has shown up in the past. God has been with us. Why would we doubt that He'll be with us again? And we made a decision. We moved forward with what we were doing, and we trusted the Lord for the results of the decision that we made. And it was really an exciting moment. And I think about the people of Israel, and I think about how often in the Psalms in particular, they go back to the works of God and they recall the ways that God has provided for them in the past in order to instill confidence for what God was doing in the present and what He would do in the future. And Psalm 105 gives us a great example of that kind of a narrative going on even in the Psalter as we sing these worship songs to the Lord. And in Psalm 105 it says, "Oh, give thanks to the Lord, call upon His name, make known His deeds among the peoples, sing to Him, sing praises to Him, tell of all His wondrous works, glory in His holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice, seek the Lord in His strength, seek His presence continually." And then it says, "Remember the wondrous works that He has done, His miracles, and the judgments He uttered. O offspring of Abraham, His servant, children of Jacob, His chosen ones." The exhortation here is to, hey, as you seek the Lord and you seek His presence, remember what God has done. And of course, if you've read the Psalm in today's Bible reading, you know that the psalmist goes on and recalls the work of God in the life of Joseph, and then in and through the life of Jacob, and then in and through the life of Moses. God has been faithful in the past, and the Israelites, they rehearsed these stories over and over again. Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery, and yet he remained faithful to the Lord, and God delivered him, and God used him to deliver his people. God brought Jacob through great trial and through exile from his homeland, in part due to his own rebellion against God and his family, and yet God was faithful to Jacob, and God brought him home, and no longer was he a sojourner, but he was brought back into the promised land. And yet when famine caused him to have to leave, then God used another deliverer, Moses. And here God delivered His people once and for all out of Egypt and through the wilderness, where they would eventually enter into the promised land. God has been faithful in the past. He'll remain faithful in the present. He'll be faithful in the future. I wonder, we can apply this as a church. I wonder for you, how do you apply this in your own personal life? What stories do you remember of God's faithfulness in your life that encourage you to trust Him in the present? What stories do you tell your kids? What stories do you talk about with your spouse or your friends? How has God been faithful to you? How are you remembering those things? And how are you allowing those to build your confidence about what God is doing now and what He'll do in the future? When I was traveling in Indonesia at the camp that my daughter and I were serving, one of the people there gave a testimony, and this woman recounted the Ebenezer stones of her life, the different ways that God had proven Himself faithful in her life. And as she retold this story of her life and the ways that God showed up when she was a child, having to trust Him as she moved to a different culture, showing up as an adult, getting cancer, and having to trust God and His healing plan. She recalled these stories from her own life in a way that helped her to express confidence that God had been at work, God would still be at work. And it certainly did. It gave great confidence to the kids and to all of us who were listening, and we were able to rejoice. Friend, how are you rejoicing in what God has done in your life? How are you recalling that great work of God in your life? And how are you using that? Or how, more importantly, are you allowing God to use that to build confidence in you in Him? How are you allowing God to use how He's worked in the past to instill confidence in you for what He's doing in the present and in the future? Listen to how the psalmist wraps up here. It says, "So He brought His people out with joy, His chosen ones with singing, and He gave them the lands of the nations, and they took the possession of the fruit of the people's toil, that they might keep His statutes and observe the laws." Praise the Lord. The people remembered what God has done, and they trusted God for what God would do. And here God does deliver. He gave them the lands of the nations, and they took possession of the fruit of the people's will. God bless you, friends. Let's keep recalling God's stories, recalling God's faithfulness, as we keep reclaiming God's promises, and as we keep trusting in God's presence in all things. May this be true of us today and always. God bless you. Have a great day. And Lord willing, we'll see you again soon on the Cornerstone Connection Daily Devotional.